Some major breaking news here. Donald Trump has been indicted by the Department of Justice in the stolen classified documents case, marking the first time in American history that a former U.S. president has been charged by the DOJ. Now, we won't know the specific charges against Trump until he's arraigned, which will happen shortly. That'll be the first in-person appearance that he'll make in the courtroom for this case. We do, however, have enough information to make an educated guess as to what those charges might be. For example, we know the charges listed on the Mar-a-Lago search warrant, including obstruction of justice, destroying federal government records, and violations of the Espionage Act. It's possible we could see those charges when the indictment is ultimately unsealed. It's also possible that we could see other charges, including conspiracy charges or false statements charges. Again, all of that remains to be seen, but it is worth noting that if Donald Trump is ultimately convicted, the Espionage Act has a maximum penalty of 10 years in federal prison, and the statute for destruction of records can also bar anyone convicted from holding future office. Could that play a role here? It all depends on what the charges are, when the trial date is, whether Trump is ultimately convicted, and what the sentencing will be. All of which is to say that we are thinking about 100 miles down the road, but it is possible that Trump's run for the presidency in 2024 could be impacted by this indictment. I should note too that when the charges are unsealed, if we do happen to see any conspiracy charges, that'll up the ante significantly in this case. Not only is that a more serious charge unto itself, but because other co-conspirators would be involved in this conspiracy, it would raise the prospect of flipping them into government cooperators. For example, you might remember how Fulton County DA Fani Willis had announced that her decision on whether or not to indict was, quote, imminent. Well, that was back in January, 5 months ago. So why would she say that the decision was imminent if it wasn't, in fact, imminent? Because it gives all of those possible co-conspirators one final opportunity to cooperate with law enforcement, knowing that if they opt not to, then they'll be indicted. So while we all assume that Willis's announcement was for our benefit, to prepare us all for an indictment decision, it wasn't. It was a warning to Trump's enablers and co-conspirators in Fulton County that they can either cooperate or get indicted. And I'm just going to go out on a limb and guess that nothing offers more of an incentive to flip than knowing that you'll be prosecuted if you don't. So it's not unreasonable to suggest that in the 5 months that have passed since Fani Willis's announcement, the district attorney's office may very well have been working with those now cooperating witnesses against Donald Trump. And it would stand to reason that the exact same thing could happen with the DOJ. Now, in terms of Trump's defense, first off, he's never had one. He's had excuses that he has desperately surfaced in an effort to diffuse responsibility off of himself. For example, he's pointed to the fact that both Joe Biden and Mike Pence were also found to have retained classified documents, only there was one teensy little difference between what Trump did and what Pence and Biden, among others, did. And that was that while Pence and Biden immediately volunteered to return any documents and invited law enforcement to search their properties for any further missing documents, Trump decided that he was entitled to keep everything for himself. He decided to ignore subpoenas from the National Archives. He decided that he would have his attorney attest falsely that all of the documents had been returned when they hadn't. He decided that he would unlawfully retain those documents so long that the FBI ultimately went to a federal magistrate for a search warrant, which the judge agreed necessitated that warrant. And then when those FBI agents executed that warrant, they found exactly what Trump had pretended wasn't there. So this idea that what Biden or Pence did is in any way on the same planet as what Trump did is nothing more than desperate wish casting for Donald. His other defense, aside from his whataboutisms, is this idea that, so what, Trump was president and he had absolute power to declassify whatever he wanted. Now, first of all, that's not true. There is no absolute presidential declassification power denoted in the Constitution. What there are executive orders issued by previous presidents with regard to declassification, and the most recent one was issued by Barack Obama in 2009. That executive order sets out guidelines on statutory command that requires consultation with the agency that originally classified that information before anyone can try to declassify it. It outright restricted the declassification of documents containing information related to nuclear weapons and intelligence agents, which, by the way, was one of the materials picked up by the DOJ in the Mar-a-Lago search. And most importantly, that executive order also made one more point, that no official leaving government service may remove classified information from the government's control or direct that information to be declassified in order to remove it from agencies' control. Meaning that A, Trump couldn't take them because they were still classified, and B, even in the unlikely event that he did declassify them before removing them from the White House, that would have still been restricted under the most recent executive order. And then, of course, the icing on the cake, recent reporting revealing that federal prosecutors have audio recording of a summer 2021 meeting in which Trump acknowledges that he had possession of a classified Pentagon document about a potential attack against Iran, indicating that despite his claims to the contrary, Trump knew full well that he retained classified material after leaving the White House. In other words, whereas he had claimed that everything was declassified by him, he clearly understood that that wasn't the case, considering the document couldn't be both declassified and also classified to the point that he was, quote, aware of the limitations of his ability post-presidency to declassify records, which is just the latest of a seemingly endless cascade of examples of the fact that whenever Donald Trump opens his mouth, the first person who should be worried is usually Donald Trump. Now, Trump's raft of pathetic excuses aside, one major indication that he was going to be indicted was the fact that a federal judge had already approved the crime fraud exception in the case. Judge Beryl Howell had ordered Trump attorney Evan Corcoran to turn over evidence in what she described as an alleged criminal scheme after Jack Smith's team argued that Trump, quote, deliberately misled his own attorneys about classified materials at Mar-a-Lago. As a result, Trump's attorney-client privilege with Corcoran was pierced, which, again, was only possible if there was enough evidence of a crime to do so. Meaning that while this indictment is only happening now, it's been a long time coming. As for Trump himself, I've never been more certain about anything than I am about the fact that we are guaranteed to see more rambling screeds where he paints himself as the victim in some massive witch hunt. Although I should note that if you were wondering whether this was actually a witch hunt, here's Trump's own former Attorney General answering that question for you.
Based on the facts, as the facts come out, I think over time people will see that this is not a case of the Department of Justice, conducting a witch hunt. In fact, they approached this very delicately and with deference to the president, and this would have gone nowhere had the president just returned the documents. But he jerked them around for a year and a half, and the question is, did he deceive them? And if there's evidence of that, I think people will start to see that this says more about Trump than it does the Department of Justice, and that is that he's so egotistical that he has this penchant for conducting, risky, reckless acts to show that he can sort of get away with it. It's part of asserting his ego, and he's done this repeatedly at the expense of all the people who depend on him to conduct the public's business in an honorable way. And, we saw that with both impeachments, and there's no excuse for what he did here. Whether it's a crime or not remains to be seen.
Do you think he deceived them? You know this man very well. Do you think?
I think the government believes that.
So yeah, if the guy who is willing to come out and purposefully misrepresent the entire basis for the Mueller report to protect Donald Trump is that clear-eyed about Trump's culpability in this instance, then that doesn't exactly bode too well for the guy. And one last thing, I know that we'll hear the inevitable whining from the GOP about how this is just the left trying to take out the frontrunner for the Republican nomination, but just because Trump is a candidate for president does not absolve him of accountability. He's still beholden to the same laws as every other American, and he's beholden to the same consequences for breaking those laws as every other American. Declaring your candidacy for president doesn't make that go away. And beyond that, it's not the left or Biden or the Justice Department who's to blame here, it is Donald Trump. No one forced him to break the law. That was his decision and his alone. So if the Republican Party is looking for a target for their anger, I'd probably recommend that the party of personal responsibility look to Donald Trump to actually take some. And I'm sure we'll also hear some scolding from those folks who say, we shouldn't be happy about this, there's nothing good about a former president being indicted. And to that I'd say, no one on the left wanted Trump to break the law. In fact, the left had been the most vocal, the most dissatisfied when Trump did break the law. But this indictment isn't a commentary on that. That ship has already sailed. This indictment is a reminder that we abide by the rule of law in this country, and that is something worth applauding. It's a reminder that despite Trump's best efforts to place himself above the law, that he failed. We shouldn't be scolded into not applauding that, because that is absolutely something that I'm grateful for. So there's obviously more to come in this federal prosecution, but one thing is already clear. Donald Trump's days of making a mockery of our legal system are coming to an end. He's facing accountability in New York, in Georgia, and in the federal government. And he's learning pretty quickly that the finding out part isn't going to be too much fun for him. Before you go, I need some help. Please subscribe to this channel and do your part to help grow the progressive media ecosystem. I don't do sponsorships or paid ads, I won't ask for money, but just subscribing to this channel goes a really long way, and it helps get the message out to more people. The subscribe button is right here on the screen. You can also subscribe to my Spanish language channel, which I made to reach those crucial Spanish-speaking voters. That link is on the screen too. And finally, if you want to listen to my audio podcast, you can follow that link as well. Thanks so much for watching.